Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of TDA Talks. I recently sat down with Stephen Warren, who's a former professor of earth sciences at the University of Washington and a cyclist who's been on a few of our trips in the past. So we had a really interesting discussion about climate issues and bicycle touring, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for doing this. If we could just start with you telling everyone your name and which tours you've done and where you're based in the world.
My name is Steve Warren. I live in Seattle. I was born in Wisconsin, but I've lived in Seattle now half my life. And the tours I've done with TDA, 2016, I did part of the Silk Route, the sort of the central part, starting in Siberia, going across Kazakhstan into Kyrgyzstan. And then 2018, I did the first section of the West Africa tour, Morocco and Western Sahara.
Great. And you and I have never met, but you've been on tour with the owner, Henry Golds. I think you were with him in West Africa?
That's right.
Yeah,
that was fun getting to know him.
One of the things he told me about, which I thought was great is, and you mentioned it in one of the journal reports you sent to me, is that you would sometimes stand up in front of the group and give a little mini lecture. You are a professor of earth sciences, or you were at the University of Washington, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And specializing in climate. And
Right.
Yeah, I did that. I think actually it could be, I would recommend that TDA encourage riders to do that. I had things to say, but so do the other riders.
It's true.
They might not feel like volunteering, but if they were asked, would you mind giving a 5-minute talk about something about where you live or what you've done or something you know about?
No, I agree.
They were really mini lectures, sometimes as long as 15 minutes, but usually shorter, that I was able to, actually part of what I would do when I know I was going to do that, I'd already made a promise that as I'm bicycling along, boring stretch, I can be thinking about rehearsing the talk I'm going to give.
And so you've been to Antarctica a few times. I read something about a winter you did in Antarctica in 1992. Was that the first time you had been?
No, that was, I've been to Antarctica now, I think 11 times.
Wow.
Usually it's for 2 months. But I did go once for a whole year. And I spent that year at the South Pole Station, which you read about. Yeah, that was an unusual year, a year when I never went more than 6 miles from home the whole year, and and had limited communication. And it's a different lifestyle. There were 22 of us there, and I'd wake up in the morning with no fear at all that I was going to encounter someone whose name I'd forgotten. There were some skills that you get an opportunity to learn some skills that you wouldn't do unless they were your profession back home.
It's it's not the same, but it reminds me a little bit of being a crew on one of our cycling expeditions, because we'll often have a medic and cooks and drivers, but just like you were saying, like you have to be willing to do other things than your specialty, right? You have to work as a team and do whatever needs to be done to keep things rolling.
Right. And that was, that was interesting and enjoyable to see on these TDA trips, how the crew worked. And it's, there are a lot of challenges there going through exotic countries with different customs, different languages, and so I was impressed with how well the crew managed all of us and
Right.
On these trips.
I was curious to learn how you got a ridge in Antarctica named after you. So I forget where I read it, maybe on the University of Washington profile of you. It said the Warren Ridge was named after you.
Yeah, well, there are plenty of ridges in Antarctica, and
Sure, but I don't have one named after me.
well, I think it was just, I guess I did enough. I mean, my 11 times to Antarctica and serving as the station science leader for 1 year at the South Pole and making some scientific accomplishments that there was a program manager at National Science Foundation who recommended me, and it's not anything particularly prominent like a large glacier or that some of my friends have named after them. It's a ridge on the side of a minor peak on Ross Island.
Cool.
So I haven't been to that ridge. I have thought that possibly sometime if I happen to be in McMurdo Station and there happens to be a helicopter going over there anyway that happens to have an empty seat, that I might
Sure.
request an opportunity to go visit my ridge.
You deal a lot with glaciers and particles and solar radiation. Is that one of the biggest things that climate scientists are worried about, is the melting of the ice caps? Is that like I know they're all issues, but is that one of the biggest contributors right now to the issue? Like, I know in Canada there was a massive ice shelf that recently just broke away. They said was like the size of Manhattan. And when you hear these things, it's hard to fathom these things happening and hard to understand what it all means.
Okay, yeah, well, actually there are a lot of damaging consequences of global warming, and you know, there are effects on agriculture with the warming of where crops can grow and what kind of pests come in, you know, to damage the crops. And then there's the problem of sea level rise, which is happening, and it's happening, and it's having big effects, or will have big effects in countries that have large areas of low-lying, like the Mekong Delta and Bangladesh, and well, even you know, Florida, and the Nile Delta too. So, and the reasons for that, the two main reasons. One is the warming of the ocean; just the water expands as it gets warmer. The ocean water does. But the other is the ice on land. If that goes into the ocean, then it raises the sea level. So what's going on now, where there's a real big focus of research, is in West Antarctica. Let's see, I guess starting from, you know, where it starts, snowfall on Antarctica falls onto the Antarctic continent, and it builds up year after year, and it's too cold to melt. So it just gets compressed under its own weight into ice, and then the ice flows down to the coast, still too cold to melt. So it floats out onto the ocean, floating ice shelf, hundreds of meters thick, called an ice shelf. And these ice shelves, then at the front, they're, you know, ocean currents and swell and tides that cause cracks to form, and then icebergs break off. But in places, the seawater that flows in under these ice shelves is warm. Even if it's just a couple of degrees above the freezing temperature, it can melt huge amounts of ice off the bottom of the ice shelf. And that's happening in parts of West Antarctica. And what that does, well, it thins the ice shelf, so then it floats up above some of the bedrock that it's pinned onto, that it, you know, are slowing it down by friction. And also when these ice shelves, and then they flow faster, and if they flow faster, then ice coming off the continent also flows faster. And so, in fact, where the ice shelves have completely broken off on the east side of the peninsula below South America, as a consequence, see, these ice shelves were actually holding back the glaciers, just sort of buttressing the glaciers. The
Right.
ice shelf is gone, then the glaciers flow faster, and that ice is coming out into the ocean and raising sea level. A lot of debate and a lot of research going on to find out how fast that's going to happen. Might be a few meters just in this century.
What do you think, like as a tour operator, we've talked a lot more about climate change, especially this last year, and thinking about what we can do, because just like individuals and other companies, we're all contributors to climate change to some degree. There's obvious benefits to a cycling tour where not everyone's in a bus driving every day, but we still have, diesel burning vehicles and propane tanks for the cooking. We all have to live in the world we're in. What sort of responsibility do you feel like companies like ours have in the broader picture of climate change?
Well, let's see. I think voluntary actions to reduce CO2 emissions are fine to set as examples, but I think they're not really quantitatively effective. What we need is a tax on carbon emissions that then makes it more profitable to conserve or to use less energy, and go for efficiency. Bicycling is, it's healthy, and it's it's a way of taking a vacation that's not using directly as much in the way of fossil fuels. Although the riders usually fly in airplanes to get there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be probably a bigger part of their carbon footprint than any of your trucks are doing. I actually wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper in response to an article about what they called flight shame, that choosing to have one less child, or the CO2 emissions caused by having one more child is equivalent to something like, 9,000 or something round trip flights between Seattle and Europe.
Right. So more than you could ever do in your lifetime, basically.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
I got a lot of flack for that. Now, I did notice on these trips, these bicycle trips that I took with TDA, that there were a lot of the riders were child-free or childless. So maybe it's maybe we're all living the low-impact lifestyle by not having very many children.
It's tricky. So it's hard to know what our individual action should be sometimes. But obviously, reducing your consumption is a fundamental thing we can all do, I guess.
Well, what I would say is that the problem with reducing your, let's say flying less, or riding the ski lift less, or anything you do, or driving less, whatever you do, or turning down the thermostat in your house, so burning less heating fuel.
Mm-hmm.
All those things, they all not only save on energy, but they save money too. And that money that you've saved, you're going to spend on something which ultimately burns fossil fuels. And even if you don't spend it yourself, you give it away to charity, somebody else is going to spend it. You could give it to the Nature Conservancy, and they'll use it to buy some land to keep it wild. But all that's happened then is the money has gone out of your pocket into the pocket of the person who used to own that land, who now will spend it on something that burns fossil fuels. So I think the only way really to reduce your CO2 emissions is to either, there are two things you could do. One is to go for what's called voluntary simplicity, meaning take a lower paying job or retire early. The other thing is to have fewer children, because your CO2 emissions really is determined by your essentially by your income or by your productivity. And so the worst thing you can do is to produce another producer.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. But also, like besides reducing your income or having less children, it makes it hard to like in our day-to-day lives then to feel like we're making a difference. But I think what you also said earlier was that changes have to obviously come on like governmental levels too, right?
Yeah, that's what we really need.
Yeah. Let's get back to cycling. When did you start cycling? Like, when did you first get into cycle touring?
I had my first bicycle in 1953 when I was 8 years old. And I've been bicycling ever since then, but it's mostly for commuting. And I did, when I was in college, I took some like overnight trips. The first time I did a multi-day camping trip by bicycle was with a group of friends 25 years ago. We went across South Dakota and Nebraska for a 9-day trip, and that was really fun. But otherwise, I didn't take any multi-day trips till I then started with TDA. Well, it's not a routine type of vacation for me. It's just I did these 2 TDA trips, but otherwise I've taken backpacking trips and canoeing trips, but not bicycling except with these TDA trips. And the reason I took them, they were going to get me to remote parts of the world that I really wanted to see, and I thought bicycling would be bicycling on a supported trip would be a good way to see those areas. There is an option, and which I did use on the longest days, which was not to ride my bike the whole way, but to start out in the truck and ride the truck to the lunch stop and then start bicycling from there. And I did more of that in in the West Africa tour because we were actually encouraged to do that. So slow riders were encouraged to accept a ride with the truck, and everybody was friendly to me. And when I would come into, if I did ride the whole way myself on my bike, and I'd come into camp, and I'd get people cheering for me, saying, "Good job, Steve! Well done."
Yeah.
It was pretty pleasant that way. Yeah, I guess that would be my advice to a slow rider, is to take advantage of that opportunity. Of course, the truck doesn't have room to take a lot of people, but certainly there, when I needed it, that was there.
Yeah, it's a great way, like if you're someone who's sort of on the edge of being able to do the full distances every day, to do that once in a while, to sort of give your body a break, but also like just to have an easier day to kind of relax mentally and regroup for the days ahead, sort of thing. So yeah, it's something we do encourage people to do when there's space, for sure.
Yeah, there was one day on the West Africa tour that I and another rider who was from Denmark wanted to see the museum. And because we went there first thing in the morning and spent an hour or 2 there, then we were the last riders. And so when we got to lunch, we were the last ones at lunch, and we were persuaded to get in the truck and take the truck the rest of the way.
Right, right. Do you have any other tips for people who might watch this and we're considering doing a trip, whether it's one of our big expeditions or in Europe, like, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, to do some studying, learn about the geography and history of the countries you're going through, and maybe a little bit of language. You don't have to really learn Russian language, but if you just learn the alphabet, which doesn't take very long to learn, then you get a lot out of sounding out words on sign and names of cities and even some cognates that you'll recognize as the same as English words that can make the trip more interesting.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks for putting up with all my stupid climate questions. I
Oh, I
appreciated
guess
that.
I should say something about, about bicycling in Antarctica.
Oh yeah, please do.
There was, I think it might have been the first time I went to South Pole. There was a bicycle there, with wide tires. And of course the snow is, it actually is fairly hard. You don't really sink in if you're walking. You don't need snowshoes because the wind blows it and packs it well. But
Oh, okay.
it's especially well packed on the airplane runway because the airplanes land on skis and they pack it down really tight.
Mhm.
And then there's a taxiway, and the actual pole, South Pole, is enclosed in the taxiway. So by riding a bicycle around the taxiway, I can say, well, I bicycled around the world.
Perfect. The short way around, but still it counts.
Yeah.
Thanks again, and I hope you have a great afternoon, evening, and appreciate the time.
Okay, same to you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, thanks for listening. Hope you tune in to the next one.